Hello, good evening. Shavua Tov. It's good to see everyone here tonight. Make this really brief. It's my privilege to invite to the Bima Marshall Levaur, who has been gone for a year, and we miss you, and is suffering the heat and humidity in Florida, alongside us suffering the heat and humidity in Pittsburgh. But so Kana Marsha is here to introduce our Ruth and Bernard Levaur Contemporary Lecture Series speaker for 2024.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to have you here, and I'm glad I'm here with you. And I'm just going to give you a real quick rundown of how the series came to be. For my parents' 50th anniversary, they decided they didn't want presents, but they wanted to commemorate it in some way. And so they decided to start this endowment and named it the Ruth and Bernard Levaur Contemporary Lecture Series. And believe it or not, that was in 1984, a few years ago. So I'm glad I'm here. I've always been involved in helping plan things, but I've been in Florida for the last 14 months. So if it's good, it's the staff. If it's bad, it won't be bad. So let me quickly do the introduction. Rabbi Michael Zedek is Rabbi Emeritus of two outstanding congregations, the Temple Congregation B'nai Judah, located in Greater Kansas City area, and Emmanuel Congregation in Chicago. In September of 2021, he was named Rabbi in Residence of St. Paul School of Theology, a United Methodist seminary, a position created for him. Rabbi Zedek teaches courses on Judaism to interreligious dialogue and advises students on what Christian ministers should know about Judaism. Rabbi Zedek is a frequent presenter on themes relating to spirituality for professional groups around the world, including South Africa, Israel, Russia, Italy, and Hong Kong, among others. He is a regular presenter at Rancho La Puertain in Mexico, the oldest and perhaps most well-known spirituality and fitness resort in North America. The rabbi has a significant profile in the interfaith community, serving as founder and host of Religion on the Line, the radio program that recently concluded its 29-year-long run. He's the author of many articles for professional and popular journals. His first book, Taking Miracles Seriously, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality, was published in 2023. Please help me welcome the rabbi. Yes?
It's important that he does do a good job because we have a road of Shalom, not of the forest, right there. And he better do well. The DT is outdoors.
I see. Did you get all that?
Well, I am. I'm forewarned.
I didn't get all that.
Oh, Madame Lafarge from. Can I help you? Yeah. Enchanté. Yeah, so charming, so charming. Madame Lafarge is from Tale of Two Cities, and by the way, it's reasonable. It is the best of times for many of us, and it's the worst of times for too many of us, and it's both all the time. Is this on? Can you hear me? You make me louder. Am I loud enough? Is it okay? Yeah. Marcia, first of all, thank you. Second, I wish I could thank your parents for the establishment of this program, and I hope that in some fashion what we share tonight will be a proud addition to what they wanted to make sure happened for this extraordinary and historic congregation and for our community. There's lots of challenges, after all. And one of those challenges tonight would be, if I say something doesn't make sense to you, what in the world is he talking about? I don't understand. Make me make it clear. I find myself rather interesting, but if I'm only talking to me, fair enough? Okay? And I hope we'll have more than enough time for some questions, commentaries, and maybe brief alternative speeches. So this presentation started at Rancho La Puerta in Tecate, Mexico, which has a certain currency in terms of worst of times. It's in Tecate, Mexico, because one of the two founders was a Jewish refugee from Hungary, 1940. He couldn't get into the United States. We didn't want their kind, our kind, here. Things come around again, don't they? And all kinds of nuances and iterations. At any rate, I was giving a talk to a group in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Some of you may have heard of it, YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And after the talk, we were having dinner. And, one thing led to another. What do you do? I'm the CEO of a place called Rancho La Puerta. And we're always looking for interesting speakers. Would you be interested in coming? I had never heard of the place. My wife kicked me under the table, and I knew that meant I was supposed to say, yeah, I'd be interested. So in exchange for giving some talks, we get the place for free. It's an extraordinary spiritual wonder in the midst of high chaparral. But I had to come up with 3 talks as opposed to the 1 talk. So, one thing that's interesting, especially when you're dealing with spirituality, is everybody thinks it's the big deal moments that define spirituality. It's the everyday commonplace in the valley moments, not just the Sinai moments that separate the wheat and the chaff. So I came up with a talk that I called Miracles of the Ordinary, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality. And several people, to my delight, you really should write this up. I tried very hard not to. And eventually it got to me and I said, okay, I'll write it. So I wrote a manuscript which I had called Miracles of the Ordinary, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality. The book agent changed it to Hiding in Plain Sight, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality. And the publisher was the only one who really counts, is why it has the title, Taking Miracles Seriously, A Journey to Everyday Spirituality. That aside, now let's talk. One of the things that's interesting to me is the power of stories. I mentioned this last night. So here's a story that comes out of Buddhist tradition, which tells of a guru who took it upon himself to somehow, I need to get the attention of the Buddha. Now, by the way, why a guru would need the Buddha's attention is a whole other matter, but I don't want to ruin a good story with facts. So he figured, I can get the attention I seek if I can somehow master the ability to walk on water. So 20 years of mindfulness, intense meditation, he succeeded. He was able to walk on water. He showed the Buddha, and the Buddha responded, I don't understand. Why didn't you simply pay 2 rupees and take the ferry? Similar story, centuries and many miles removed from India, story from the backwoods of Virginia. A hunter has a new hunting dog, and he's really excited to take it out for its first hunt. He goes to his favorite duck pond, shoots a duck, instructs the dog to fetch, and the dog walks out on the water to fetch the duck. Of course, the hunter is nonplussed. It's not the normal experience, right? Packs up his truck, puts the dog in the back, goes back into town. Next day, curiosity gets the better of him. He invites a friend to go with him. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Go to that favorite duck pond, boop, the dog fetch by walking out. Say nothing. Shoot, fetch, walk back, walk back, walk back, walk back. Finally, the owner of the dog can restrain himself no longer. He says, you notice anything peculiar about my dog? Come to think of it, the darn thing doesn't know how to swim. Now, the reason why that is meaningful or impactful is because lots of things happen and we don't recognize what's happening. For instance, most of us are old enough in this room to remember the so-called golden age of situation comedies. Mr. Ed, yes? the talking horse, right? Now I don't do a lot of impressions, but I do a really good impression of Mr. Ed. You ready? Wilbur! Pretty good, right? You should get a little tepid applause. Thank you very much. And Wilbur is properly nonplussed when Mr. Ed talks, right? Because it's not in our experience for horses to talk, let alone have the best lines in classic situation comedies. But the Hebrew Bible has an exact parallel, Balaam and his talking jackass, in which Balaam, a pagan prophet, carries on a conversation as though a perfectly normal thing with his, forgive me, jackass. By the way, the story may be suggesting who is the real jerk here, but that's for a different sermon at another date. But what's intriguing to me is the larger rubric, because I am going to assert, and my fingers are never going to leave my hand, that every single time in the Hebrew Bible, what you or I would call a miracle occurs, no one draws what we would call the correct lesson or the obvious lesson. Let me be very clear. Text says it takes 10 plagues to get the children of Israel out of Egypt, right? By the way, you may be aware that in rabbinic tradition, they invent thousands of plagues, which is their way of saying, watch out, something funny's going on here. Now, let's just pretend you're Pharaoh. You're Pharaoh. One plague, maybe 2 plagues. This is not going to work out well. I probably should cut my losses. Fair conclusion? But the text says it takes 10. The Israelites go out, and Yul Brynner immediately changes his mind. First problem, no firstborn horses in the cavalry or on the chariots, right? Second problem, no firstborn officers, because they all died in the 10th plague. Ha ha. The Israelites are stuck in the Sinai at Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. We used to call it the Isthmus of Suez, low-lying, swampy areas where you build canals. But they're stuck there, and again, I'll refer to what's imprinted in so many minds, the Ten Commandments version. Edward G. Robinson sees the dust cloud of the Egyptian tanks, the ancient equivalent, chariots, coming to get him, and they panic. Why did you bring us out here to die? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt? They'll say that over and over again. It's one of their best lines, right? Why don't they say, look at these stupid Egyptians. We've got God on our team, and they don't realize it? So they panic, and Moses, my other imitation, Charlton Heston, tries to still them with, be still and see the workings of the Lord. So the text then says, Moses turns to God, and the text says, God says. No, I don't know what God says. I know what the text says. Why do you cry out to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward, which may be the singularly most important miracle in the entire Tanakh, to go forward. But let's not spoil the problem. It says the sea split and they walk through on dry ground. Now, there's always a hint or clue. If we would use the critical faculties we would use with any other item or document or issue and apply them to Hebrew Bible, we might learn something deeper. Shouldn't there be mud? The sea split. Walk through on dry ground? So I want to be a literalist. 2 miracles for the price of 1. But big deal. They walk through in safety, right? By the way, if you take the number 3 million plus or minus, which is unlikely, it would take weeks for 3 million people to walk through, but that's not the problem. The real problem is this. The Egyptian chariots are held back by a whirlwind of fire, right? Those of us who remember our Sunday school lessons, a whirlwind of fire, I promise you. The Israelites pass through in safety, the whirlwind disappears. You're an Egyptian chariot driver. You're going to drive in there? You got to be out of your freaking mind, right? But the text says they do. And then, once more, hint or clue, then the children of Israel beheld Mitzrayim, dead on the shores of the sea. Mitzrayim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. Mitzrim would be Egyptians. It's not an accident, because the next thing is Oz, 2 little letters. Then They had emunah, usually mistranslated faith. It really means confidence. Then they had confidence in God and in Moses, God's servant. Until the next chapter. We've got no water. We need water. Why'd you bring us out here to die? And of course, as you recall from those Sunday school lessons, Moses splits the rock and water. By the way, this is a miracle you could actually do. For those, anybody a geology major? Oh, thank God. So the Sinai consists of three principal rock formations: granite, sandstone, and limestone. Limestone has a remarkable quality of when water falls on it, it hollows it out. That's how you get limestone caves. Now, it's not enough to feed 3 million people with water, but big deal. The pattern is the point. They're water. Everything's fine. We have no food. Why'd you bring us out here to die? In Egypt, we had cucumbers, leeks, and garlic. I'm quoting. And they get some miraculous stuff called manna. And this is, I think, the Hebrew Bible's attempt at humor. They looked at it and they said, manhu, which is archaic Hebrew for, what is it? Thank you. I agree. I think it is actually hysterical. But by the way, there have been efforts to explain what it was. One suggestion, the oozings of the tamarisk tree, which is a source of protein, and tamarisk trees grow in the desert. Another, much less appetizing notion is that it was bird droppings. There is a tribe in Ecuador, the principal source of protein in their diet is, to be polite, guano. Now, don't be so offended. Some people look at what we eat and, oh my God, boiled beef flunkin'? Are you kidding me? Tongue? At any rate, the pattern is the issue. Everything's fine, right? We're sick and tired of manna. We've cooked it every way we can cook it. We want meat. The next day, the camp is surrounded by boids. I'm from Brooklyn originally. That's the correct pronunciation for birds. There's boids everywhere. You don't even have to hunt them. You can pick them up and pop them right in the oven. Now, this happens to be a miracle that happens every single year in the Sinai. It's one of the world's great natural bird flyways, and those birds have been flying nonstop over the Mediterranean. There are no rest stops. They're making their migration from Europe to Africa, further on, and they rest there. So there's a basis for the notion. But again, the pattern is the point, because what happens next? They get to Mount Sinai, wherever that may be, and in the single greatest personal appearance in all of human history, far better than Taylor Swift, God is experienced by the entire community. By the way, in religious literature, that is unprecedented. Normatively, it's one person, 3 persons, a few persons, but an entire people encountering God. By the way, this no additional charge. This is not normally. There's a wonderful midrash that the entire people heard only the first letter of the first word of the 10 Commandments. The first word is Anochi. The first letter is Aleph. Aleph, as you may know, has no sound. They heard silence. None of us have ever truly heard silence. Because if you were, in fact, in full silence, you would hear your blood. You would hear your heart. But ambient noise gets in the way of that. They had a moment that transformed their lives and transformed history. Moses was up on the mountain. And what do? They build a golden calf. And lo and behold, they say to this golden calf that they just made, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." You gotta be kidding me. But what's really intriguing to me is these stories demonstrate that we are either the stupidest people to ever walk the face of the earth, or there's a great deal more going on here that meets the eye. And obviously, Jewish tradition and its daughters are devoted to the notion that there's a heck of a lot more going on. For instance, Martin Luther King's explanation for these stories, and he used the word stories, that's important, is that these stories demonstrate that it is easier to get the slaves out of Egypt than it is to get Egypt out of the slaves. That is always true, whether it's a movement for a people's liberation or an individual's embrace of freedom. We are free before we're willing to embrace and accept the responsibility for our own lives. In fact, another aside, some of you know the name Erich Fromm. One of his less well-known books is a book called Escape from Freedom. And among the reasons why it comes to mind, especially in our current environment, is he points out that for most of human history, most people have not been free. And it's not because someone steals freedom from us. It's because all too often we're ready to trade our freedom for certainty, the certainty of someone else being in charge. It's a dangerous modality that's part of the human story. So, the book and this presentation for the rest of the time that I share with you and vice versa is based on another notion. People are free to disbelieve the evidence of their own experience. I know that's true because it's true about me, and I make a leap to presume that others share that same blind spot. Days pass, years vanish, and as the old prayer book used to say, and we walk sightless among miracles. Part of the problem is, what do we mean when we say the word miracle? If I were to ask you for a definition, you probably include, pretend I'm right, some inclusion of the word supernatural, right? A supernatural intervention into the regular routine of experience. Fair? I hope it won't completely shock you, but there are Hebrew words that we translate into English as miracle, but they don't mean a supernatural intervention into the regular routine of experience. So the three most common words. Word number one is nes, like nes gadol haya sham on the dreidel. A great miracle happened there, but is the translation. But nes means a sign or a symbol. What are signs and symbols? They are things that point to something else. That's what they do for a living, right? Next word is ot, which is literally a letter of the alphabet, which is an agreed upon sign that or this is O. Why is it O? Because we've decided it's O. Because it points to a sound more than itself. Fair so far? But the best word is Pele, which we often translate as wonder or miracle. It really means a wow or an amazement. And one of the suggestions I would put forth is, when taken seriously, what isn't a wow or an amazement? Part of the problem is that we divide our experience into ordinary and extraordinary. And what do we do with the extraordinary? We have no choice. It slaps us across the face and says, pay attention. And what do we do with the ordinary? That's equally clear. We take it for granted. Were we to take the ordinary for granted less, our lives would be more filled with life. I've never said a statement that I'm more serious about. Were we to take the ordinary for granted less, our lives would be more filled with life. Now, it just so happens that happens to be Judaism's distinct expertise. You don't need any religious tradition to know when the extraordinary is happening, but it's that the ordinary is also extraordinary. So here's my cliche on this. The aha is incredible, but everybody knows the aha is incredible. It's the ho-hum is also and always aha. Or to put it in poetic form, earth's crammed with heaven, and every bush is afire with God, but only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries. Now, remind me, Albert Einstein, please. So I want to talk about the singularly most challenging notion to what I'm presenting. Let's assume for a moment that I came in here and I said, I was in the parking lot, and there was this bush. And this bush was on fire, and it wasn't burning up. And not only that, Marcia, it talked to me. It talked to me. What would you say? I mean, come on, let's be honest. You say, uh-oh, drugs perhaps, or maybe a breakdown, or in the American culture, we probably say, I think we should put this person on television and send them money, right? Send me $20 and I'll pray for you, but at least send me the $20, right? But we've clearly got to talk. I mean, Moses, the text says, has an experience that changed his life and changed the history of the world. Now, if you promise not to tell anybody, I don't think bushes talk. I don't think they talk Hebrew, English, or Latin, or Greek. But I do think a person can hear oneself addressed in lots of experiences. So, let's give a framework for what's a possibility. Notice I didn't say what happened, a possibility. The text suggests it's toward the end of the day in the desert, something that we are rare to experience, a sky without any pollution. Sunset would mean as if the sky were on fire. Here's the sunset, here's a bush, and there's Moses. What kind of bush was it? I can tell you precisely. It was a bramble bush, because it's the kind of specialized vegetation that grows in the desert, right? Because it's got to have small leaves to minimize evaporation so that it can sustain itself. It's going to have thorns in order to minimize how much it loses to the animals that need to consume it in order to survive. Sunset, bush, Moses, as if it were on fire and not burning up. Because, folks, there's no logic to how, in what sense can you say something's burning and it's not burning up? Unless it's symbolic, unless it's metaphorical for something deeper, as in a symbol. Because what did Moses see? I'm suggesting. I'm safe in the Sinai suburbs. I'm married to the boss's daughter. I'm going to inherit the family business. I belong to all the right clubs. I've got a 3-chariot garage, and he gives it all up to go back to Egypt, to risk everything, to liberate a people who aren't even going to be grateful, right? Because he understood he can't be free while his people are burning in the fiery furnace of Egyptian slavery. It's not an accident that the Hebrew Bible calls Egypt the Kor HaBarzel, a fiery furnace. It's also not an accident that just about every Holocaust memorial in the world includes the burning bush motif. Not because it's a symbol for God, but it's because it's a symbol for this people. Burnt in history, but not consumed. So, he heard himself addressed and began a story that quite literally changed the history of the world and is still an ongoing challenge to the world. So Einstein suggests there are 2 ways to live. The first is as though nothing is a miracle. The second is as though everything is a miracle. I honestly believe it's possible to get closer to that second way. I don't think anybody can live on that mountaintop all the time, but I'm absolutely convinced that we can have more of the everyday if we would just stop being dualists of dividing experience into ordinary and extraordinary. Let me give you a for instance or two. This is a midrash that turns the world upside down. To children born in the wilderness, when they entered the promised land and they learned that you plant the seed in the ground, you cultivate it, and you harvest it, and then you process it into wheat, and then you get bread, was nothing short of a miracle. Because what was the commonplace for them? It was manna. But it's nothing less than that quality of a miracle. Or put differently, Rabbi Henry, when I was in seminary, we in our liturgy class, they called it the plumber's prayer. You know what I'm referring to? Yeah. So the plumber's prayer is one of the first prayers they teach us in a very nice, bowdlerized translation. Praised are you, eternal our God, ruler of the universe, who has fashioned us in wondrous manner, with openings and closings. And if that which were to be open were to be closed, and if that which were to be closed were to be open, we could not stand before you. It's about urination and defecation. and the recognition that why don't we pay attention to those functions when they work as opposed to when they are not working, which is the more commonplace experience, right? By the way, the Chatimah, the seal of that particular blessing, is praised are you, eternal our God, mafli la'asot. Mafli is a verb form of that word pele. Who wows to do. Who I think the fancy translation is performs wonders. But who wows to do. What isn't a wow, and what doesn't point to more than itself. Because behind everything is the infinite. Or to use the traditional Western word, God. But we'll talk about that, perhaps, additionally in a while. What I'm intrigued with also is what gets in the way of this awareness, of mindfulness, as we call it, right? It's almost become a cliche of our time. For instance, Moses, by the way, one of the principles of rabbinic interpretation of the text is there's no unnecessary words. If something seems to be unnecessary, it's there to teach us a lesson. So Moses is instructed in Exodus, go up to the top of the mountain and be there. Now, why do you got to tell him to be there? If he's going to go up on the top of the mountain, where else would he be? And as soon as I place it that way, you know the situation. We've all had the experience. We're somewhere, but we're not wanting to be there. We want to be home. When is he going to get done? We're worried about what happened yesterday. We're worried about that meeting tomorrow. But if we would just be present to our experience, we might have a deeper awareness of the 24-hourness of our lives, for whatever amount may be our portion. What gets in the way? A lot of stuff. I'm just going to comment about 3 items. Business and busyness. We have become, especially many in the Jewish community, so expert at making a living that we've forgotten the equally critical skill of making a life. We're addicted to the quick fix. Jim Morrison, we want the world and we want it now, right? Listen, I meditated for 20 minutes. How come I don't have enlightenment? I did 20 minutes of ab work. Where's my 6-pack? Long ago forgotten. But you know, oh my God, what's her name? Star Wars, Princess Leia. Carrie Fisher. May she rest in peace, because she didn't have any while she was alive. Instant gratification isn't quick enough. Originally, I wanted the book to have a cartoon from the New Yorker, but I found out it cost $600 just to be able to use the cartoon. So I describe it rather than use it. Here's the cartoon. 2 people, clearly at the Hamptons, because it's the New Yorker, right? They're at the beach, and they're enjoying their adult beverages. And one says to the other, "This is perfect. I could stay like this for the next 5 seconds." But a deeper issue is there is a certain, what's it called, a lack of comfortability in our own skin. We're, in some fashion, all ceaseless wanderers. And the ceaseless wandering in the Cain story, in verse 12, he's told he's going to be a ceaseless wanderer. 4 verses later, he settles down and builds a city, which has got to mean we're not talking about wandering. We're talking about an existential condition of being, in some fashion, a yes and no to ourselves. All of us have that yes and no-ness, which is probably why we need Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and why so many people aren't here, because they're going to show up for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So, put it this way. Groucho Marx's great line, "I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would me as a member." That's not, it wasn't just true about Groucho. I have this notion, as I sort of play with the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, the evil inclination, the good inclination. Evil inclination is that little devil that says, "Eat the cake." And the little angel over here says, "Don't eat the cake." Usually the little devil wins, doesn't it? But both voices are present in every person. Or as I like to put it, I am much more than I ever thought I would be, and much less than I should be, and both statements are true. Wisdom is if it's okay for both of those statements to be true. In fact, I once gave a sermon. I'm not okay, you're not okay, but that's okay. Because if we have to wait until we're okay, we're all doomed. To put it in another fashion, the great humanistic psychologist, Dr. Carl Rogers, it is a curious paradox. When I accept myself as I am, then I can change. The hard part is to accept ourselves as we are. But magic, honestly, magic can happen if we do. Or at least if we get closer to that doing. So, let me put it this way. If we really pay attention, to quote Annie Dillard, life is like holding a wine glass under a waterfall. If we really pay attention. And maybe it's possible for less of that vintage to be lost and have more of it in us. So, for instance, before I became a rabbi, I had a brief stint as a teacher of English and writing, so for a lot of literary references in the book and some tonight. Henry James once said, "Be among those upon whom nothing is lost." And I think that's part of the problem. We're all or nothingness. But we can be among those upon whom less is lost. That's doable. That's possible. That's attainable. So how might we become among those upon whom less is lost? I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions. Suggestion number one is a true story. I learned this from one of the people I met at Rancho La Puerta. Her mother was imprisoned in a Japanese prisoner of war camp in Indonesia during World War II. Nearly 80% of her fellow inmates did not survive. They starved to death. Her mother, obviously, an exception. And the daughter marveled that for all of her mother's life, she had an enthusiasm for this fragile gift we call life. After all, lesser circumstances have made more than a few people into cynics and only viewing life as a sentence to endure, right? But her mother didn't have that. She had an enthusiasm and joy up to the end of her days in her 90s. She asked her mother, "Help me understand, what was your secret?" Her mother's response, "Every day of my imprisonment and every day thereafter, I would try to do three things. One, to see something beautiful. Two, to hear something beautiful. Three, to say something beautiful." I'm a rabbi. I added a fourth because it's the Jewish notion, to do something beautiful. To see, hear, say, and do something beautiful. Every night before I attempt to sleep, and I'm one of those who's at that age and stage of life where it's an attempt, not always successful, but it's one of the things we try to do. I ask myself those four questions. So Jewish, 4 questions, right? And if the answer to any one of them is no, I have to get up. Because my real work, my soul, S-O-U-L work for the day, isn't finished. The magic, of course, is the more you do it, the more it's impossible not to have the experience. And the more I am aware that there are burning bushes scattered randomly through every single day, present even when I'm not present to them. Second story. You never knew Rabbi Haddis, did you? Rabbi Haddis was the emeritus rabbi of the conservative synagogue in Kansas City, where Rabbi Henry and I first met each other other than at the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. Rabbi Haddis was long retired. He retired to little devilishness as opposed to sainthood. He had a little mazik in him, if those of you who remember the old Yiddish term. Did you know? Yeah. So he happened to be blind, and he and I would study together every week. I would read Midrash with him, which we both shared as a passion, rabbinic commentaries. And after the lesson, after the study, then the real teaching began. He would say to me something, and I'd always fall into the trap. So this is the wonderful trap I fell into that changed my life. He said to me, "Michael, when do you say the Shechechianu prayer?" Yanu prayer. And I'd just gotten out of seminary. I knew more than I was ever going to know. Ha, ha, ha. I said, when you're doing something for the first time or the first time in season. By the way, that's the answer. First time, you've never done it before, you could include the Shechechianu as a way of taking this moment and saying, wow and wonder. Pause, reflect. It may be ordinary, but it's also filled with wonder. First time in season, First night of Hanukkah, in addition to the 2 blessings for lighting the Hanukkah, you say the Shechianu, but not the second night because it's not the first time in season. That's what I said to him. He said, wrong. I said, I just got out of seminary. I know more than American. What are you talking about? And then he used the Talmudic phrase that translates, let your ears hear what your mouth has spoken. When you're doing something for the first time in season. First time in season. And then he said the following, Michael, when are you not doing something for the first time? He's right. Ever since, right back here, a little voice. I can't get through one before it's time for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Now, I'll admit that there are times when it's just background noise, but it's always there. And then there are moments when, and I hear him, and with him I recite, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. And that would be a good place to end, but you need more punishment in order to have a Yom Kippur. So let me suggest one more. At our wonderful dinner this evening, I made a little prayer for myself before I ate. I said the motzi, right? Praise you, eternal our God, ruler of the universe, that caused the earth to bring forth bread, right? Now, the first thing that's wrong with that is that the earth doesn't bring forth bread. It brings forth the raw materials, right? I like to put, God doesn't get bread unless you and I contribute. But deeper, why do I bother to say a prayer before I eat and a prayer after I eat? I don't think for a moment that God needs my prayer. But I need to pray. Why? So that I can recognize, another burning bush opportunity, another burning bush moment. To wit specifically. Why not just go up to the feeding trough, the feeding bowl, the whatever you want to call it, and gobble it down? Why bother to pause? Because in that pause, I'm hoping that I will reflect the following. I am going to get from this stuff the nourishment and energy to sustain my life. I'm going to hopefully have an aesthetically pleasing experience. And lo and behold, wonder of wonders, my body's going to get rid of what it can't use anymore. We are awesomely, wondrously, miraculously fashioned. And usually we only pay attention to it when it ain't working. So poets know this, and they have talked about it for some considerable time. One of the chapters in the book is devoted to some poets who capture this in a particular way. But poetry only works because it's inchoate in us, and the poet gives us the vocabulary for our experience. Fair? So a story and then 2 poems, and I promise to try to stop. Stories told of Robert Frost was being interviewed on his cottage in Vermont by a graduate student doing her PhD research on Frost. They were having dinner, and sunset. The graduate student says, "Oh, Dr. Frost, isn't that the most exquisite sunset?" And Frost supposedly says to her, "Listen, I make it a point never to discuss business while I'm eating." But John Burroughs, the founder of what we now call the Sierra Club, once suggested, if you want to see something different than you did yesterday, take the same walk. But we don't have to wait that long. We don't have to wait that long. So here's just an excerpt from a poem and then a poem. How many of you know Mary Oliver? Or knew Mary Oliver? So I'm going to go a small portion of a poem called, the full poem, which is very worth, is When Death Comes. The last few lines. I would hope this would be true for all of us, for whatever portion is assigned to you or me. When it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride, married to amazement. I was a bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Some of you may know E.E. Cummings, I thank you, God, for most. I want you to pretend you've never heard it before. And you're hearing it again for the first time. One of the things that's remarkable about this E.E. Cummings poem is that, well, it's reminiscent of one of Abraham Joshua Heschel's great lines, who lit the fire before our eyes, and who lit the fire of our eyes? Because everything, to me, points to an infinite source that is beyond us and in us. In fact, that reminds me of a story. Homiletics. So, here, one of the things that's curious about this poem is, you may know, Cummings never used capital letters, right? Except he uses the word God in this poem, and he capitalizes it. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today. And this is the sun's birthday. This is the birth day of life and of love and of wings and of the gay great happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, and he lifted from the know of all nothing, human merely being, doubt unimaginable you. Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened. So I would hope that we can have ears that hear more clearly and eyes that are exquisitely open to the wonders all around us and the wonders in us. Homiletics. Last thing I promised before pausing and taking a drink of water and seeing alternative speeches and whatnot. To wit, it was an early homiletics class, and Dr. Eugene Mahali was our instructor. Rabbi Henry, did you have him? I did. Yeah. He was teaching a class on homiletics, and lo and behold, one of my fellow students said, how do you come up with a topic every week? Not an easy task, right? He responded immediately, that's not the problem. You only have one, maybe two sermons. The critical thing is to find out what it is. And as I look back on 50 years of one, sometimes two sermons a week, he was absolutely right, with a few exceptions of when a current event got very much in the way. My sermon is the following. There is holiness all around us. There is a sacred dimension in us. Let's get to work. Let's get to work. So I'm happy to pause for tepid applause. Shameless. And hope that if you want more, you'll ultimately consider adding the book to your library. And any questions, comments, queries. Otherwise, I have at least 400 more things I could say.
I have a microphone if someone has a question.
The ordinary for granted less, our lives would be more filled with life. Our lives would be more filled with life. I should make it a T-shirt and trademark it, right?
I'd like to thank Rabbi Zedek for being here this evening, and to thank Marcia's family, her parents, for starting this wonderful endowment. My name is Maida Roth, and I work at Road of Shalom. It's delightful to see so many of you here to talk about taking miracles seriously and to really embrace what we think is every day and make it more than every day. I want to just mention that Rabbi Zedek...
I am a doctor, but I'm not sick yet.
That Rabbi Zedek's books are available, and he will be able to sign them should you like to purchase one. I didn't want to conclude without thanking you personally for being here.
Well, I am beyond grateful.
And now, questions.
You have a connection with Mexico, and one of the things that bothers me, or what I'm concerned about, is the latest president of Mexico is an activist Jewish woman, and she won handily. And I've just had this thought that some of the cartels, the drug people, are going to assassinate her.
I don't pretend that I'm an expert on the politics of Mexico, but it is certainly possible that if she's not protected, any politician in Mexico is dangerous, if they want to enforce law and order.
So when you talked about...
Hold it a little, yeah.
Sorry. When you talked about both seeing yourself as big as you are, but also so minuscule, and then you're doing, or you are so much more than you...
I live in the tension of I am much less than I should be and much more than I ever thought I would be, and both statements are true. That's what I said, although I reversed it this time.
And that is the basis for one of the major schools of therapy these days, dialectical behavioral training. And I've found that it makes so much sense no matter what. If I am doing the best that I can and I still should maybe try to do better, then that to me is the balance between you're enough and keep doing more.
Yeah. Let me suggest the following in effect. I think some of us only hear the voice that says, I'm not nearly good enough, and that's a recipe for depression. And some of us only hear the voice that says, woo, aren't I fantastic? And that's a recipe for being alone. Because it's our vulnerability that makes us embrace others. And it's our capacity to know that we're worthy of that that makes us accept that we should be embraceable and embracing. Boom, there we are. Now, I'll give you a very specific example of what I mean. If the only thing I understood was that I'm not nearly good enough, no person is qualified to be a parent. Fair? If my kids got me in touch with the fact that I'm not qualified, I would be dangerous. I would be dangerous to them in either physical or emotional abuse, or dangerous to myself, because the classic definition of depression is anger turned inward, right? If the only thing I understood is that let me put it this way, you would have wanted me to be your father. I was so great. What a father. Oh my God. But my kids would have never learned how to ride a bicycle. Because how could perfect fathers let them risk skimming their knee? You know? We live with such a dialectic.
I actually have a quick question.
Ooh.
I quote you as saying, and I want to just make sure you did say this.
This reminds me of a great story.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that one time you gave a sermon, and it was called Believing is Seeing.
Ah.
Is that right? Did you do that?
Yeah. Some things have to be believed in order to be seen.
Yeah, okay. Can you say something about
Yeah,
that?
sure. It was based on, you remember Marshall Saper?
Yeah.
Marshall, this was one of the pioneers of talk show radio, psychology. And for those who are interested, he had a 25 share, which means that 1/4 of all the radios in the greater Kansas City area were listening to him. Unheard of. He once gave a show in which he talked about Fairfield, Iowa, which is the headquarters of Transcendental Meditation in the United States, and that people were there to watch transcendental flying, and that people who watched it saw people fly. Now, admittedly, the article that described it said people were jumping in a lotus position. No easy trick, by the way, but that's not exactly flying. But the people who were there said they saw them fly. And his comment was, some things have to be believed in order to be seen. They expected someone to fly, and so they did. Somebody may remember the amazing Kreskin. Does that name ring any bell to you? He was a charlatan clairvoyant, and he had a great excuse for how he developed the talent. He said, when I was a little kid, I could see through rocks. My mother never told me it was impossible. So, but it's good. But when you said you wanted to quote me accurately?
I'm writing it down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I do remember the sermon, and that's over 30 years.
That's at least, yeah. But what it reminds me of is every rabbi has the experience of someone coming up to him or her and saying, Rabbi, do you remember what you said? It changed my life. You have no memory of saying it. You don't think you said it, but okay, thank you very much. And as this happens to be the 50th year of my rabbinate, one of my bragging honors was I was asked to give the sermon in honor of the 50th year class. That's no small thing as far as I was concerned. And I began with that issue, and I said, for instance, some people have said, I have said, there are only two movements in Judaism. One is away from God, and the other is toward God. I don't remember ever having said it. It's a good line. The other one was, there is no place where God is not, and where God is, all is well. Doesn't mean things are fine, but where God is, all is well. And last one, I promise, because I saw some people looking at it, I'm happy to stay, but it's a little longer story. Remember the Hellsbergs? Yeah. This is one of the great philanthropic families of Kansas City, and Maida, I think you'll like this story, okay? The Jewish Federation of Kansas City sent me to the paterfamilias, Barnett Hellsberg, to see if I could get him to be willing to be the chairman of the annual campaign. And in part, I think he was so shocked that I came to see him and didn't ask him for money. And I said, I'm asking for something even more valuable, your time. He agreed. I remember that. The rest of the story I've heard him say several times, I have no memory of it whatsoever. He says, 2 weeks later, we ran into each other, and he said to me, Rabbi, what have you done? My friends see me coming, and they run screaming down the alley, holding onto their wallets. He says, I said, Barnett, isn't it tragic that the only way they think they have it is if they hold on to it? Ta-da! Any other? So shall we?
Which Kansas City are you from?
Well, it's Kansas City, Missouri is the metropolitan place. Kansas City, Kansas is an industrial, impoverished, smaller community.
But when people say Kansas City, they also mean
Johnson County,
Johnson County, which is on the Kansas side.
Which are the major suburbs of Kansas City, Missouri. 2 states.
Anyone else?
Adjourn to the reception.
All right, thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, you know what? Questions, comments, commentaries? At the reception. And thank you again.